Hello, and thanks so much for joining us once again on the Drumbeat. I'm Aaron Merchant, and I lead the Early Childhood Education portfolio at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. At the Chamber Foundation, we view childcare as an essential piece of workforce infrastructure and a two-generation workforce issue. It's essential to support the workforce of today and vital for developing the workforce of tomorrow. On the Drumbeat, we've spoken with experts on many different topics centered on childcare, ranging from the economics of childcare to what quality looks like, to ways business leaders can engage with their communities to help create innovative approaches to meeting the needs of parents and children. Today, I'm excited for you to join us in the first installment of a new series of interviews under the Drumbeat umbrella, the Child Care Provider Roundtable. Now, the Drumbeat will continue to interview economists, state and local chambers of commerce, academic experts, and the like, but we also want to make certain that we're hearing and learning from the small businesses who are the workforce behind the workforce, childcare providers. Over the course of the roundtable run, we'll hear from small and large childcare centers, family childcare homes, faith-based providers, for-profit, nonprofit providers, childcare providers in big cities and from small towns. And we want to learn more about what that looks like in a day-to-day sense, to not only provide childcare and early childhood education, but to be relied on to support the workforce and economies of entire communities and regions. For our first roundtable, I'm thrilled to be joined by Nicole Sohn, the co-founder of Journey Discovery Center in Spokane, Washington, and Erica Van Horn, the child care director at the YMCA in Custer, a small town in western South Dakota. Erica and Nicole, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourselves a little bit further.
Thanks, Aaron. So Nicole Sohn here from Spokane. I own an early learning program and childcare program in Spokane. We serve 89 children and employ 44 people. So we're really excited to be here to let you know more about what it is to both be an employer and, you know, someone who really centers ourselves in working in our Spokane community and supporting people going to work every day.
Hi, yeah, so I am the child care director here in Custer, South Dakota. Our community is much smaller. We only have about 2,000 people in our community. And being the director for the YMCA here, we are the only licensed child care. There are some quality home daycares, but we have had a huge influx of people over the last 3 years and are having trouble providing enough child care for our community. Our center offers care for 40 children with 31 on our waiting list. And so we are really struggling to provide enough care for our community to service the needs of it.
Nicole and Erica, again, thank you both so much for being here. When it comes to childcare, just the idea of childcare, the topic of childcare, I think the three of us prior to, say, 2020 sort of understood and appreciated how important childcare is, both for children and for working parents. But I'm very curious to hear in the people you interact with every day, and then again, your broader community, whether it's business leaders, policymakers, for each of you, how has the perception of childcare shifted around you? And Nicole, let's start with you in Spokane.
Absolutely. I think that, the pandemic obviously drew big, bright lines around the crisis that is running and operating a childcare program. And I think that there was some great dissemination of information to understand, the how hard it is to run the business, why it can be so expensive, but still not have enough revenue to actually be able to pay employees well. I mean, so there was a lot of good information that got out there during the pandemic. Right now, I think we're at a point where people know about it, but they don't know what to do about it, in that it is such a big systemic issue that we're really trying to focus in on, okay, what in Spokane can we do? Because maybe it's more complicated as we look across every community and every city in our nation. How can we maybe start regionally? in our state, and start creating solutions together. So we're still hearing a lot of conversation about it, but we're also feeling like we're competing with a lot of other really big issues. At least in Washington state, we have a lot of housing insecurity, and our legislature just passed some pretty historic investment in housing, which is wonderful. But I think that right now we feel like there are so many other big things that also kind of broke open during the pandemic that we're not at a point where we're seeing really tangible solutions that are going to offer these long-term fixes that are really going to prevent childcare programs from continuing to close. And really, honestly, the biggest struggle is we really are struggling with a pipeline of talent coming to us. So there are a lot of providers in Spokane that I know have empty classrooms actually because they can't find qualified workforce. So as we're trying to build capacity, we have capacity sitting open in our community. And that's kind of heartbreaking to see because we know how many families are struggling to just find childcare so they can go to work. So it's a little bit about what we have going on here.
Thanks so much. And Erica?
Yeah, I would say it's very similar here in the state of South Dakota, a very different state, but very similar. We have seen the great thing about COVID is now that people maybe understand a little bit more about childcare and why the business model has just really never worked. We've seen a lot of support statewide, and here in Custer, our local community has showed a lot of support for it. But again, just nobody really knows where to start and how to help. We have had some great community meetings, but again, just we're kind of at the beginning stages of that, and hopefully we can see some action. But I think the biggest thing that has happened as a community is that people understand that, we need help and we need support. And as a Y here in Custer, we have done a lot more fundraising in the last 3 years, but have had a lot of support and great feedback. Parents are more supportive of what we're trying to do because they understand the big problem. We do struggle to get staff. Custer is a very expensive place to live. And so for me to pay staff a livable wage is just not possible. So we obviously need to get some more support. But the nice thing about it is that the word is getting out, and it's just not my opinion. It's a state problem. It's a United States problem. So I think that that's been supportive. We just need some action now.
And Erica, you mentioned that you currently have 40 spots at the YMCA in Custer. And so, it is such a hyper-local issue, childcare, in so many ways, whether it's Seattle or Spokane or Charlotte, North Carolina. In Custer, South Dakota, what does 40 spots mean? Like if the YMCA were not able to provide care next week, what sort of ripple effects would that have in a community the size of Custer?
Oh, it would be devastating. We are the largest facility. There are no other facilities that can take as many as we do. We have a handful of home daycares that we do know about. They're not registered, but we know about them, and they do not take the full 12 kids that they could take. And so if the Y would close, it would just be devastating to this community for sure.
And Nicole, you mentioned some recent historic investments in housing in the state of Washington, which, as you mentioned, is both needed and very exciting. During the pandemic, there were some emergency federal investments in childcare that helped. The phrase that we heard a lot was, kept the ships afloat, right? Like it wasn't going to revolutionize the childcare sector, but it was going to prevent a total collapse. Now that we are, I guess we can say, in some ways on the other side of the pandemic, obviously that definition differs a little bit for everyone. But now that we're sort of on the other side of the most intense parts of the pandemic, what are some lessons that you feel were learned when it comes to investments in childcare, and maybe some things that maybe policymakers at state or federal levels should be aware of in the future?
Yeah. I think in every case, when we're trying to invest in any community, any program, any system, to connect with the people doing the work so that they can guide how the investment will be best used in the actual system is always just best practice. So for us, when we're seeing, millions of dollars come into our state to help stabilize us, engaging the childcare providers early so that we're a centralized voice that help give insight into the best way to help stabilize our business. And then that way we know that we can get it directly into the hands of our employees, because we all run our own payroll. We all know what we're doing there. And so making sure to just engage with providers of all types. And sometimes there might need to be also some regional differences and some program differences. So I think that now we have a great foundation of getting money out into the field that we can build on. And I hope that when we see future investments, we use that as a starting point and are able to have some really honest dialogue in, okay, what didn't work? Did those stabilization grants, when they got to childcare centers, for example, did that truly offset your operation enough that you could increase wages so that you could attract and retain your employees? So I think that what we're hoping is to be engaged early and to have input so that it makes the biggest impact for our teachers, and that hopefully, ideally, it lowers costs for our customers, because we know it's too expensive. So that's the balance that we're hoping happens when we get investment, to be optimistic.
Absolutely. And speaking of investment, Erica, I know that during the toughest part of the pandemic, at the county level, you mentioned there's increased investment sort of figuratively, people understanding why childcare is so important, but also some literal investment in terms of keeping the Y open at maybe the toughest part of the pandemic. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about sort of how you presented that to the county in terms of, why it's so important that we have this center, and what their response was to that.
So right at the beginning of the pandemic, before we got like the PPP that really saved us, we were told by our main branch that we had to come up with $57,000, which for a small community like Custer and a small facility that only employs 12 people, that was a huge undertaking. Like, we were very overwhelmed at the thought of trying to come up with $57,000 in 2 months. And so we got together, we put together an ad hoc committee, and some of our board, a few of our parents, who they knew that if they lost the Y as their childcare, they wouldn't be able to go to work, or they would have to move. And so we had a lot of investment in just the people in our community coming together. And then we approached our county and said, if we don't raise $57,000, we have to close our doors. And this is how it's going to impact your local city government and the county and all of the just local businesses. And we came out of that meeting. They said, we have some COVID relief money, and here's $57,000, which we did not anticipate getting the full amount. We just knew that we had to start somewhere, and we were in hopes if they could give us any, because we knew the impact that it would have on the families that we serve, and knew that it would, we pointed out to them, which they already knew, but they knew how important it was to keep people going to work, because if people can't go to work, it affects the entire community, not just one facility closing. It would affect every business in a way here in Custer. So they were very supportive and have continued to support us going forward. They help subsidize our program, but they seen the bigger need and were very supportive of keeping the Y open.
That's excellent. And looking at, we, even just in this conversation, we've discussed how childcare has gotten the attention of more and more people as almost like a silver lining, I guess, of the pandemic, is that people really understand that at a fundamental level how necessary it is. And on my end, I know that in my time at the Chamber Foundation, I have seen childcare go from, do you have any resources or materials about this? Hey, I have a few questions, to what are we doing about this? We need to do something about this yesterday. And whether it's small towns like Custer, whether it is places where a company wants to expand and start a new plant, and one of the first questions is, where's the childcare going to come from? And so looking at the number of business leaders who have either proactively or playing catch up, but taken it upon themselves to learn more about childcare, to be more engaged in the topic with their employees, with their communities. Nicole, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience, because I know that you're pretty directly involved with your Chamber of Commerce, and just what you've learned in terms of how that can be helpful as a small business, as a provider engaging with that group, but also maybe some things that group has done that maybe other states or community chambers of commerce could replicate.
Yeah, absolutely. So both my so Spokane's Chamber of Commerce, um, GSI, and the statewide Chamber of Commerce, the Association of Washington Business, have been really engaged in this issue. And I think that as a whole, the business community is very well respected. And so when the business community starts engaging on this issue, people pay attention. And specifically, the Association of Washington Business is right now partnered with another organization to do a legislator education and action project. And we are actually currently planning a bus tour where we hit all 10 congressional delegations in the summer, and we bring the members of Congress, members of our state legislature, business communities, and we actually get those lawmakers out into the community, meet childcare providers, convene businesses, convene advocates, and have really deep dive conversations unique to that community so that we start reflecting regionally what we can do as a state. So that's actually a really exciting way that our statewide Chamber of Commerce, and then through their grassroots alliance, the local chambers of commerce, are going to be able to engage in this issue coming up this summer.
That's really exciting, and I'll be looking forward to hearing more over the summer as that campaign continues. And then Erica, I'd be very curious. So in a town like Custer, it's a smaller town, but it's in a beautiful region. There's tourism is a major industry, and so looking at the different economic drivers in a city like or a town like Custer, what are ways that either you would love to see the business community interact with childcare providers, or ways that you think the Y might be able to sort of reach that broader business community?
I think we're just starting that here in town. There is a group called the Early Learners of South Dakota who we just invited to come into our town and talk to business owners and help them to realize that this is not just a child parent problem. Like, the parents don't have to find care. We have to help them to find care because there just isn't enough. And so I think, the Early Learners of South Dakota has been huge in helping get the word out. They were just here a couple of weeks ago and helped our businesses to understand that, because being in Custer, the demographic here is a lot of retired people who have kind of gotten the opinion that it's not their problem. They've already raised their kids, and so they just don't think about it. They don't think about this as being a problem, but it is a problem. And so, just getting our businesses on board so they understand that it is a community issue. It's not just parents not being able to find childcare. And then advocating, they need to advocate for childcare and growth in childcare, because we really need to come up with a bigger solution. We need to expand either the YMCA or to add another facility. Something needs to happen, but our businesses, I would love to see them come alongside us. And even if all they can do is advocate for us, that we are an essential business and not just babysitting, and that it isn't just a parent problem, it's a community problem. So for our community to continue to thrive and grow, we need to come alongside businesses and childcares working together to solve this problem.
And Erica, I thought you made a great point about that perception between the difference of childcare and early childhood education, and just babysitting, which is sort of like a common misconception among folks who maybe aren't as aware, as deep in the weeds. And I would love to hear from both of you, zooming out just a little bit, but what are some of the greatest misconceptions that you think are still pervasive, even though we've had policymakers, business leaders, new parents, who have gotten up to speed very quickly on the importance of childcare? But what are some sort of myths or inaccuracies that you still run into, and how do you respond to those?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So I think one of the misconceptions, and I think that even going back to Erica's point, is because we're called so many different things, I think people still struggle to know what is the difference between childcare, but it's also daycare and it's early care and education. And there's just so many things that we're called. But I think effectively a lot of it's the same thing, in that I was with a presenter from the Hunt Institute, and what he was sharing is just the power of adult interactions, and that children are learning in every single moment. And so we one of the misconceptions is that if you're a child care provider, are you a preschool? Are you an early learning program? And in Washington State, we have high quality early learning in everything that, every kind of setting under everything that it's called. And so I think that, I'll get calls, okay, you're a child care provider, but do you do preschool? And so I think it's how are we articulating the kind of child development focus that we have in our curriculum planning, so that parents know that we have preschool that happens within our child care program. So I think that's one of the big misconceptions. I think the other misconceptions still, even though the business model has been really heavily covered, I think it's still hard to wrap your mind around how could it be so expensive and still not be able to really pay employees what their value that they're providing our community is. And so I think that more work, even just articulating the ratios, when I am either testifying in front of a policy, in front of a lawmaker, or explaining, when you have a kindergartner and we're spending on average, $15,000 to $20,000 a year of our state funds, and they're at a 1-to-20 ratio. When I have an infant at a 1-to-2 or a 1-to-3 ratio, that really is the correlation. So I think that the pricing is still a big misconception, and kind of getting down into that ratio is really helpful for people to understand the cost versus what they're paying for.
I would agree with all of what you just said. I mean, we're dealing with the same and similar things. I think sometimes we can get too caught up in, well, are you a family child care? Are you, all of the labels, and not understanding that in every place here, whether you are a home daycare or a licensed facility, that quality piece is there. And to focus on, I would really like to see us focusing on the quality, because, it's not easy. What my staff does is not easy. And these kids come to us every day, and they work so hard to use all of the moments throughout the day as teachable moments. And so I think that was really important what you had said, Nicole, is that every moment in a day is a teachable moment. The other thing, in Custer that we struggle with is that we are the only licensed childcare. So there's no comparison. They feel like we do charge so much money, but when you are comparing, when you don't have anything to compare it to, we hear a lot that how can we not make it? You charge so much money. How do you not be able to make it at the end of the year and pay people better? And why do you need subsidized? And why do you need to do fundraising? And so something that we do at our fundraiser is we lay out, this is how much it costs for us to staff these buildings. This is kind of how much we pay staff, because a conversation that I had that was kind of neat with a mom, she was a nurse, and she had asked me, she said, why do you keep losing staff? I said, well, let me ask you, would you take your nursing job and you would quit it and to come here and work with 20 little kids for $12.88? And she said, I would absolutely not do that. I understand that. But they feel like if we charge so much, we should be able to pay more. But we go into our year every year in a deficit. And so I think getting that knowledge out to people who need to hear it is huge. But it's a challenge because, as I had said earlier, we are in a retirement community. And so when they were raising their kids, they took them to the lady down the street or the little grandma, and they didn't pay near what they have to now. But the cost of living has changed. There's been so many things that have changed since then that we constantly are fighting with. You charge so much, you should be able to pay your staff well, all of those things. And it's just, they don't get the information that they need to hear. But I think that is changing, and I'm very optimistic that the people who are needing to hear it in businesses and in the community here in Custer, it is changing. So that is a positive.
And if I can make a shameless plug for another episode of the Drumbeat, we actually speak with our friend Mary Jansen about just that, the true cost of care and why parents pay so much, why providers are paid so little, and sort of what we can do collectively to address that. I always feel when I have these conversations, so I started in childcare policy before I had kids, and it was something that I thought that I was passionate about. And then now I have a 2.5-year-old, and it has become something more of like a real personal and professional mission to really drive home the point that childcare is early childhood education. And it just blows my mind seeing, when my son was 10 months, 11 months old, and just the leaps that he made being in that quality childcare setting. And so, we talk about pre-K, but really just anything before kindergarten is early childhood education. And I really appreciate both of you so much making the points that you have, and also giving us some really excellent examples of ways that childcare providers can work with the larger business community, but also ways that larger business community can support these small for and not-for-profit businesses that do provide this essential service. Is there anything else that either of you would like to share with us before we wrap our very first roundtable?
Yeah, I think that really it's just that childcare can be such a powerful community center. When we talk about early learning, when, 50, 60 years ago, when people were raising their children, they were still raising their children in community with each other. You had people who, you had neighborhood kids and predominantly women, raising our children. We are people who need people. That's how we grow and learn. And childcare is that. It is, children need to be with other children, and they need to have mentors and multiple adults that they learn different things from. And that is the power of childcare. And if we really center that at the heart of our communities, it is incredibly powerful. And it's also efficient. If we, I have almost 200 working Spokane parents. And if we can, center resources and things to support our families through one focal point, it is so incredible, because as a working parent, you're so busy, you don't have time to always research. Maybe you're looking for housing access or, food benefits or all kinds of, there's a whole number of things that can be disseminated through childcare. And so I think that not only is it a great community focal point, it's also really impactful and efficient. So I'm just, proud to be able to serve that role and excited to see where that's going to go in the future.
I guess to wrap things up on my end, I would like to just thank what you guys are doing, because this is huge, just to be able to have a platform to talk about what we do every day, because we do understand how important it is. And we do like to have a voice out there of how important it is. And I think that it's things like this that will continue to support change, because childcare as a whole across the United States, there needs to be some change. And I think that it's so important to keep moving forward and not become complacent after the huge pandemic and all of the problems, that we can continue to move forward and recognize that this problem isn't going away. It was there before, it was magnified during, and it's still here. So I just thank you guys for all that you're doing, and that there's advocacy happening across the United States, clearly in Spokane, Washington, and in Custer, and all the way across the United States, there's advocacy that is speaking towards childcare. So that's amazing to hear and to see.
Well, Eric and Nicole, sincerely, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules and joining us here today. We really appreciate it, and this won't be the last time we talk.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you so much to everyone who's joined us for this episode. We are excited to continue to bring you additional roundtables where we will hear from more childcare providers, in addition to your traditional Drumbeat episodes that will feature business leaders, economists, and academics talking about childcare and how it can interact with the business community to create a stronger American workforce. For more resources and information on childcare, please visit uschamberfoundation.org.